The Southern Wood was a dark place. Every town and city that came near its borders had evil tales of things that occurred there. And no town sat closer than the town of Stephen Switch. It was in this particular town in the spring of 1977 that one such tale was born, the legend of Crow's Nest Cabin. To understand this legend, we have to go back a ways. Just a few years after the Civil War, a log cabin was found in the southern woods. It appeared that the cabin had been abandoned, though nobody could tell why. It was well built with a stone foundation and a sturdy frame. There was no record of anyone ever living in the cabin, or of anyone who even owned the land it was rooted to. The forest was protected wilderness, so no one could even move into the thing unless they could show proof of ownership. Needless to say, no one ever showed up. It eventually became just another landmark within the woods. By the 1950s, the cabin had developed a reputation of sorts. It was now known as Cross Cabin. The local rumor mill had churned up a doozy of a tale. As the story went, the cabin was built by a Samuel Bedford Cross, a Confederate soldier that had survived the war. Apparently, when he got home, he found another man's boots by his front door. Cross found the owner of those boots in his bed with his wife. He didn't count on that too well, so he shot them both dead. Cross went to trial, and after being found guilty of murder, he was hung out in front of the courthouse. Of course, that was all pure hogwash. As I said, no one knew who owned the place, and no person by the name of Samuel Cross ever lived in Stephen Switch either, though there was a man named Bedford Cross who hoboed through town around the same time this silly fiction started. No, as I said, the true fable of the cabin started in 1977. Spring was beautiful that year. Temperatures were cool and precipitation was down. It was perfect Sunday school weather. Every kid in town stayed outside from dawn until sunset, until that unfortunate Sunday in April. That's when everything changed. That was the day they found the body of 14-year-old Josephus Mosley, hanging by a noose on the porch of that old cabin. He had been found by two local children who happened upon him while playing in the woods that day. Bo and Sissy Overton had been out searching the woods for morel mushrooms, or brainy shrooms as Sissy called them. Bo was a couple of years younger than Josephus and 3 years older than his younger sister Sissy. When they came upon Josephus, they were both overcome with fear and disgust. The woods had a bad infestation of crows, and they had apparently been pecking at him for a few hours before he was found. It wasn't a pleasant sight. In fact, Sissy was so upset, she took straight off into the woods, as fast as lightning. She ended up sliding down a rocky incline and busted her lip, cheek, and knee real bad. Her brother had to carry her home, and then their parents phoned up the local police. A few years later, Bo ended up in therapy, and a few years after that, Sissy ended up committed. She never truly recovered from what she saw that day. The police cut Josephus's body down and took it to the local hospital for autopsy, though the crows had probably destroyed any evidence that could have been found. After a short investigation, the incident was ruled a suicide. Josephus Mosley's parents reported that their son had been troubled, and his teachers at school confirmed the Mosley statement. That should have been the end of it. After that day, the crows in the area seemed to nest near the cabin, and in early autumn, 4 hikers were attacked by a swarm of crows when they had gotten too close. Within a year, there had been 2 more attacks, but then people learned to stay clear of the damn place. It was soon renamed Crow's Nest Cabin by the local rumor mill, and it came complete with its own spooky campfire story. As it went, the place was cursed by a witch, and anyone who tried to sleep through the whole night there would go insane. They would hang themselves in the morning, and the crows would feast on their flesh. For a few years, seniors at the local high school tried to turn it into a dare. Anyone who spent the whole night at Crow's Nest Cabin and lived to tell the tale would become a town legend. No one ever tried it, though. Even then, people could sense that what was out there in that cabin was no joke. One could be forgiven for thinking that this was the end of the tale. After all, things went quiet for a spell. 10 years to be exact. They might have stayed quiet for longer than that, but for the actions of one Agnes Bell. Fate is like a living thing, you see. It breathes, it sleeps, and it wakes up in a bad mood. Agnes Bell had called in the complaint. The road up to Conservation Lake ran right by her house, and the only reason to go up that road was to get to the lake. Conservation Lake was Stephen Switch's own makeout point. Almost every Friday and Saturday night, the police department would get a call from old Agnes to let them know that there were some kids that headed up that way. Deputy Jacob Turner, Jake to his friends, was set out to break up the young lovebirds. Jacob Turner was 34 years old. He stood at 6 feet 4 inches tall, and he had a thick barrel chest. To look at him in his plain clothes, you would have thought he was a lumberjack by trade. His appearance was very intimidating, but he was one of the kindest men you could meet. He also had a flawless track record with the police force. Jake had already passed Agnes's home, and he was heading out to the woods on his way to the lake when he saw something peculiar. There was a light coming from one of the windows of Crow's Nest Cabin. No one went up there. The crows around here were meaner than hell, and everyone knew it. Jake pulled his car in close to the cabin and saw that indeed there was a light on inside the place. It couldn't be teens, Jake thought to himself as he scanned the place, because their car isn't here. It would have to be an out-of-towner. No locals would go anywhere near this place. Maybe some hiking tourists lost their way and decided to hold up here until morning. Still, he would need to check it out and make sure everything was okay. Jake stepped out of his cruiser and rushed up to the porch before he stopped and looked around the property with his flashlight. He thought the porch would offer more protection if those winged devils decided to swoop. He heard a crow cawing in the distance, but otherwise there was silence. Once he felt safe that he didn't have to watch his back anymore, he turned his attention back to the cabin. He looked through one of the front windows and immediately saw the source of the light. There was an old ornate oil lamp sitting in the center of an old wooden table just inside the main room. He could not see anyone else inside, however, so whoever lit the lamp was still a mystery. An unattended oil lamp in an old wooden cabin definitely counted as a fire hazard, though, so Jake knocked on the front door. He listened for a reply or movement, but after a minute of hearing neither, Jake opened the front door. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Jake shouted. "I'm a police officer. My name is Deputy Turner. If there's anyone here, I would like you to step out and identify yourself, please." Jake waited quietly for another moment, and he was about to speak again when he heard something shuffle towards the back of the cabin. Jake shined a flashlight back in the direction of the sound, but didn't see anything. He unfastened his gun, but left it holstered. "Step out where I can see you," Jake ordered. Then Jake suddenly heard a voice say, "Help!" The voice sounded strange, almost as if the word help was croaked out. Maybe someone was hurt, Jake thought. He started walking to the back of the cabin where the voice had come from. He darted the flashlight about the area, searching for whoever it was. His light fell upon an old wooden cabinet that had one of its 2 large doors cracked open just slightly. The cabinet was also located right where Jake would have guessed the voice had come from. "Is anyone in there?" Jake asked as he slowly approached, but there was silence. He took another few steps closer until he was in reaching distance of the handle on the cabinet door. The door suddenly creaked as if someone inside had gently touched it. Jake felt himself getting hot, and he realized he was a bit spooked. He let his left hand rest on the handle of his gun, and he took the safety off. He then took a deep breath and tried to calm down. It was never good to be spooked whilst brandishing a firearm. That's how officers ended up with bad stories. They still make fun of Haywood for shooting Mr. Nesbitt's rooster. It took 15 minutes to cause Nesbitt down, and then Haywood had to buy the dead rooster out of pocket. Haywood's wife about had a heart attack when she came home and found that thing shoved in her freezer. Haywood never was very bright, and to this day, whenever Haywood is about to do something, his partner shouts out, "Don't cock it up, Haywood!" Jake took another second and then reached out for the handle. His index and middle fingers wrapped about the wooden handle. Jake counted 3 in his head, and then he swung the door open, shining the flashlight inside. At first he didn't see anything, but then his flashlight reached the top shelf of the cabinet where a crow sat perched. It turned to him and tilted its head before cawing the word, "Help!" at the same croaking tone as he heard before. Then it flew at Jake's head. Jake ducked, but the bird still managed to scratch his cheek as it flew across the room and out of the cabin door into the night. Jake felt his cheek and his fingertips came back red with blood. "What the fuck?" Jake said as he stammered back to his feet. "Oh, now I know how Hayward's wife felt when she opened that freezer," Jake said to himself. He wiped his cheek and then headed out the front door back onto the cabin porch. His eyes traveled up to the sky as he stepped off the porch. His gaze was directed by a strange sound. It was met by an even stranger sight. He saw what looked like hundreds of crows circling like a whirlwind in the sky above him. They cawed and screeched, creating a noise that could only be described as hellish. Suddenly, as a group, they dived towards Jacob Turner. One after another, they smashed against his face. He felt them twitching and clawing their way into his mouth, but as soon as they made it past his lips, they seemed to turn into smoke. Jake felt like he was choking and dying of a heart attack at the same time. When the last one filled his mouth, Jake fell to the ground. For a few moments, the night was completely quiet. Jake was lying on his back, utterly still, then his fingers starting to push their way up through the leaves on the ground as he pulled himself into a sitting position. He sat like that for several more minutes. He was breathing heavily and blood was dripping from his scratched lips as he stood up. When his eyes opened, they were bloodshot and they looked infected. He wiped his nose absent-mindedly as black liquid started pouring from it. It took a couple of seconds later and Jake smiled. Jake looked around the woods, seeming to take in the scenery, and then headed towards the cruiser. "Time to visit some old friends," Jake said with a half-cocked grin as he got into his car and drove off towards town. Sissy woke from a dead sleep. It had been such a bad dream. The images were already starting to fade from her mind, but she could still see the whirling vortex of shadow. Her eyes darted around the room to find comfort, but all they found at this time of night was darkness. There was only a small amount of light coming in through the window. Its source was a street light out by the road about 100 yards away. She recognized her room, though, and that did bring her comfort. This was her cocoon, her refuge. When they had first brought her here to the East Tennessee Hospital for the Insane, or Lakeshore as they preferred to call it, Sissy really had experienced a mental break from reality. After several months of treatment, however, she had pulled herself back together. She soon realized that she would be discharged back into the world and decided to have a relapse. Here she was safe. It might have been a horrible place to live, but it was less awful than what was out there in the world. Sissy tucked herself back under her covers. She pulled them close to her neck and made sure that her feet were tucked into the blankets as well. Sissy's eyes drifted back to the window, but then she shut them tight. She tried to go back to sleep and said a little prayer under her breath that the bad dreams would not be there waiting for her. Bo Overton sat at his couch. The television was on across from him, but he wasn't watching it. He had been staring at the carpet for the last 10 minutes, thinking of nothing in particular. Between the joint he had just finished and the 5 shots of whiskey he had imbibed, his mind wasn't really on the clock at the moment. That's just how Bo preferred his mind to be. When it was alert and sober, his brain would go to bad places. It would consider picking up the knife on the coffee table in front of him and pulling the blade down his arms. It would consider the peace he would feel once he bled out. It would do anything not to know what it knew. He decided long ago that his mind was best kept numb to the world. That strategy hadn't helped him very much in his life. The true rub of addiction is that you run from your pain, but you create more pain as you run. It doesn't take long before you feel like you are trying to outrun an avalanche that is gaining strength by the second. He would have turned to let the weight of his pain bury him years ago if not for Sissy. After all this time, he still needed to be there to protect her. He was her older brother, and it was his duty. He also loved her dearly. It was the love of a sibling, yes, but it was also the love that 2 soldiers share when they make it out of war together. They had survived hell side by side, and that was a bond that could not be broken. So he would dull his pain. He would stay 1 step ahead of it just in case she emerged from her asylum. He would do this because one day she might need him again, and he would not let her down. He left the knife on the table. He left his life on pause, and he poured himself another shot of whiskey. There was a loud knock at his front door, 4 hard thumps. No one he knew would knock like that. That was a cop knock, which was a big taboo within his social circle. "Who is it?" Bo yelled without moving from the couch. "It's Deputy Turner of Stephen Switch Police Department. Could you please open up? I just have a few questions for you." Bo leapt to his feet and quickly scanned the room. He just had to make sure that nothing was in plain sight. If something was in plain sight, they would have probable cause and they wouldn't need a warrant. He saw a second joint on the coffee table, and he grabbed it and tossed it in the drawer along with the pipe he had out. He scanned the room again, and when he was sure that all illegal substances and paraphernalia had been stashed away, he made his way to the door. Bo opened the door and saw Deputy Turner standing just outside it. Jake was a good guy. Bo had his run-ins with Jake in the past, and the guy had always been respectful and patient with him. Jake would do his duty, though, so Bo had to watch what he said. "How can I help you tonight, Deputy?" Bo asked as he glanced at the cop. Something was wrong with the guy. He looked like he had a bad case of pink eye and his lips were all scratched up. "Well, I was attacked earlier tonight at Conservation Lake. Don't worry, I know it wasn't you, but if I could come in, I would like to show you some pictures. I think I have seen this guy hang around with your group a couple of times, and I'd like to see if you can identify him for me. Would that be all right, Mr. Overton?" Jake said with a warm smile on his face. Yeah, sure, come in," Bo said as he stepped aside and invited the deputy into his living room. Bo scratched his hands while Jake came inside. Bo was trying to wake his fuzzy brain up. Jake walked over to the counter that separated the living room from the kitchenette, and then Bo shut the front door and joined him. Jake's warm smile vanished. It was replaced with a menacing half-grin that Bo thought looked familiar. Before Bo's brain could even register that he was in trouble, Jake had balled up his huge, meaty fist and knocked Bo out with one punch. When Bo came to, he was lying on his back on the floor, with Jacob Turner straddling his waist and pinning down his arms. Bo struggled to wiggle free, but Jake was massive. No matter what he did, he couldn't break free. Bo saw his knife on the floor just out of reach. How did it get on the floor? Maybe it was knocked off the table when I got punched out, Bo thought to himself. "It's just like old times, isn't it, Bo?" Jake said. "You lying defenseless on the floor and me on top of you. I'd really like to play with you some more, but I'm running out of time. They'll be looking for the missing deputy soon. And to be honest, I've already tasted this fruit before. I'm here to take a bite out of the one that got away." Bo's mind reeled. What was he talking about? Images of what happened when he was 12 came rushing into his head, but that wasn't possible. This was Jacob Turner sitting on top of him. He didn't know what had happened. Nobody did. They all believed the lie. It couldn't be him. He was dead. "Josephus?" Bo whispered with confusion. "Good to see you too, Bo," Jake said with that same half-cocked grin. "How about a kiss for old time's sake?" Bo began to scream and cry at the same time. The noise was one of pure anguish. Jake lowered his lips to Bo's, and Bo tried to twist and squirm away. Jake was too strong. Their lips touched, and Jake's tongue entered Bo's mouth. Bo tried to bite down, but something forced his mouth wide open, his mouth and lungs filled with thick, foul-tasting smoke. More and more seemed to push its way into him. Bo's eyes rolled into the back of his head, and his body twitched, and then he blacked out again. Bo came to. It seemed to be easier this time. He looked around the room and saw that Deputy Jake was just starting to rouse. Bo grabbed the knife from the floor where he had placed it and then shoved the blade into the side of Jake's neck. Jake's eyes flew open in pain and confusion as Bo pulled the knife out. Bo stood over the scene and Jake's hands tried to keep the blood from flowing out of his wound. Jake squeezed so tight that he was almost strangling himself, but it was too late. He felt cold and woozy as a puddle of blood on the floor around him continued to get bigger. Jake looked into Bo's eyes and said, "Don't let him win, Bo. You have to kill him. I'm so sorry, Bo, but you have to kill him again before he—" But that was all Jake could say. He gasped for air 2 more times, and then he went still. A half-cocked grin appeared on Bo's face as he slid the knife into his pocket. He stepped over the body of Deputy Jake Turner and headed out the door. "Sorry, Jake," Bo said as he slid into his car, "but this is the only face that she would completely trust." Then Bo started his car with the keys that were in his jeans pockets and pulled out into the highway. Sissy woke from the sound of tapping at her window. She had only been back asleep for about an hour, and the room was still very dark. Sissy pulled back the covers and then slid her feet into the slippers that she kept by the bed. Then she walked over to the window to find out what kind of bird was pecking at her window this late at night. When she got there, she didn't see a bird. She saw her brother with a scared look on his face, and she also noticed he had a black eye. "Sissy! Sissy!" Bo said through the window. "Sissy, I need your help." I'm in trouble and I need you to help me. I wouldn't ask otherwise. We protect each other, right? Sissy looked about the window. She was on the ground floor, but the windows were barred. She thought for a moment, and she remembered an idea she had once years ago. She had no desire to escape, but she had come up with a plan once just to occupy her mind for a while. Life in an institution could be very boring, and it was often a good idea to play little games in your head to pass the time. There was a door in the kitchen that led outside and locked from the inside, and she had realized that you could slide through the serving area where they had put out the food. She nodded to Bo and then headed out into the hallway. She wasn't considered a dangerous patient, so she was on a low-security floor. It didn't take her long to get to the kitchen. Her plan worked perfectly. She slid through the serving area into the kitchen, and then she unlocked a service entrance door and headed out into the yard. She started looking around for Bo, but before she made it to her window where she had last seen him, someone grabbed her from behind. She felt a sting in her neck, and then things got really weird. She suddenly felt warm all over and super comfortable, like sitting around a fireplace at Christmas time with your whole family. She felt a cozy sense of security as her mind floated into a dreamlike stupor. Sissy didn't even register when someone picked her up and carried her to a car. She didn't notice when they stuffed her into the back seat and shut the door. At some point while they headed down the road, she drifted off into a groggy dreamland. Sissy felt cold and wet on her back. As she came to, she realized that she was lying on the ground in a forest. Someone had set her on a bed of wet leaves. She felt a little sick and lightheaded, like she was coming down with the flu. She pushed herself up, and once she was standing, she looked around to try to get her bearings. That's when she saw Bo standing next to an ornate oil lamp, and he was holding a knife in his right hand. The oil lamp was set on the ground at his feet, and the way the light crept across his face made him look ghoulish and threatening. That half-cocked grin he was making didn't help either. Sissy crossed her arms and started rubbing on her sides to chase away the chill that was slithering over her. She took a step towards Bo, wondering why he was holding a knife. "Did you enjoy your journey, Sissy?" Bo said with obvious glee in his voice. "On my way to come get you, I stopped by Bo's dealer. The guy was shocked when he found out what I wanted. Apparently, your brother had only ever bought weed from the guy, so when I asked for some heroin, he seemed a bit suspicious. I had to pay him double, which doesn't really matter. After all, it's not my money. I learned all about heroin from the mind of Jacob Turner, and I knew it would be the perfect concoction for tonight's reunion."
What's wrong, Bo?
Sissy said as she tilted her head and took another step towards her brother. "It's just like I said, Sissy," exclaimed Bo. "I need your help. You see, a long time ago I started something, but I never got to finish." Bo rushed towards Sissy and tackled her back to the ground. He straddled her waist and pinned her arms above her head with one hand. This had happened before, Sissy thought to herself. Bo then reached up to Sissy's face with his other hand and stroked the scar on her cheek with his thumb. "Do you remember when I gave you this little mark?" Bo asked. Sissy's eyes flew wide open. Had he gone crazy? How could her brother do this to her? He of all people knew how horrible it was. How could he bring it back up? How could he throw it in her face like this? Tears began to pour from Sissy's eyes as she watched the person she trusted most in this world betray her. "Let me tell you a story," Bo whispered in her ear. "Once upon a time, there was a young man who wanted to have some fun. He was in his hideout in the woods when along came a brother and sister. The young man decided he wanted to play with them, so he invited them into his hideout for some amusement. Once they got inside and discovered what the game was, they tried to leave. That was very rude. So the young man had to punish them by slamming the little girl face first into the wall. Then he played with her little brother for a while. He really liked playing with the little boy, even though the little boy didn't seem to want to play. The young man was just about to finish when he realized that he wanted to play with the little girl too. He didn't think it was right that her brother should have all the fun. So he threw the little boy into the closet. Then he turned his attention to the little girl. But the young man was tricked by the mean little boy. You see, the closet apparently didn't lock like the young man thought it did, and the little boy had found some rope in there. While the poor young man was just starting to play with the little girl, the wicked little boy snuck up behind the young man and strangled him with a rope. Now pay attention, because this is where it gets interesting, Bo roared. The mean little boy then tied up the body and made it look like the young man killed himself. Then the brother and sister frolicked off into the woods, leaving the young man to the fucking crows. Bo was yelling and breathing heavy, but then he took a deep breath. After a few moments, he seemed to calm down a bit. But, Bo uttered, that was not the end. The young man seemed to fill the crows that ate him with his playful nature. He started to play with anyone who came too close to the cabin, but people soon stopped coming to the cabin. The young man was trapped in the crows and caged in the cabin. He couldn't play anymore, and this made him very sad. Until one day he figured out how to escape. He realized he could enter the body of another person and take control. Once he realized this, he knew he could have fun again. And the first thing he wanted to do was find the little boy and the little girl that he played with so long ago. He wanted to finish that game they started, but this time he wanted to play with the sister while wearing her brother. A huge half-cocked grin inched up the side of Bo's face as the realization of what was happening washed over Sissy. Her face contorted in terror, and she began to retch and jerk and try to escape his hold. He started laughing as his free hand grabbed the knife and started to run it up her inner thigh. Sissy knew she couldn't break free. Bo was too strong. Sissy looked at her brother with eyes that begged for mercy.
Bo, if you're in there,
Sissy started.
Please, I need your help. He's hurting me again, and I can't stop him. I need you to stop him, Bo.
Sissy forced the words from her mouth. Her mouth kept trying to contort from the tears and fear and screams, but she pushed the words out. Bo's face softened. He suddenly stood up, and his facial expressions and body language belied the battle that was raging beneath his skin. Then a moment of clarity spread across his demeanor. A single tear ran down his face, and he smiled at his sister. Don't worry, Sissy. I won't let him hurt you. Then Bo shoved the knife into his own heart. Sissy wailed. The sound that issued from her lips would have caused the Furies themselves to shed tears of sorrow. She rushed to his side and placed her hands on his cheek. She kissed his forehead again and tried to will life back into his body. Bo looked at her with urgency. When I die, he's gonna come out. You have to run. If he gets out, he'll come after you. Then Bo's body went still. Sissy tentatively stepped away. Part of her wanted to run, but she could not leave her brother. Then her body filled with rage. She saw Bo's ribcage start to undulate and swell. Sissy's eyes went mad with hateful light.
You took everything from me. You took my innocence. You took my peace. You took any chance I ever had of a good night's sleep. But now you took my brother, and for that, you're gonna burn.
Sissy grabbed the oil lamp sitting at her feet and smashed it over her brother's head. Within seconds, Bo's entire body was covered in flames. Then his mouth flew open and crows started spewing forth from his gaping jaws. As each crow passed Bo's lips, it was coated in flames. Soon a swarm of crows were circling out of Bo's mouth. Sissy looked up and beheld the most horribly beautiful sight she had ever seen. The crows formed a tornado of black feathers and flames. It looked like fire was falling from the sky like snow, but it was pieces of feather blazing like chunks of cinder. The screeching that the crows issued forth was the sound of nightmares and damned souls. Sissy had never seen anything more ghastly or more glorious. Then in a bursting flare, the crows were gone. The night went silent, and as the last of the oil burned out, the world returned to darkness. The next day, 3 bodies were found. Deputy Jacob Turner was found stabbed to death in the apartment of Bo Overton. He had bloodshot eyes and strange scratches on his lips that the coroner could not explain. The body of Bo Overton was found in the front of an old cabin in southern woods in the center of a circle of ash. His body had been burnt, but cause of death was identified as a stab wound to the heart by the same knife that had killed Jake Turner. Strangest of all, the body of Agnes Bell was found behind the cabin. The apparent cause of death was a heart attack. She had placed the call that had sent Jacob Turner out into the woods that night, and it was her oil lamp that had been smashed over the body of Bo Overton. None of it made any damn sense. Sissy Overton, who had evidently escaped from Lakeshore that same night, was never found. Though she was wanted for questioning in the events, there was no physical evidence to tie her to the crimes. Eventually, people moved on, and Stephen Switch's rumor mill had plenty of material to last them for a few years. In some stories, Agnes was a witch, and in others, it's Sissy practicing the dark arts. In one, Deputy Turner turned maniac and started killing people. There was another where Bo injected himself with some strange toad toxin trying to get high and went all Mr. Hyde instead. Pure hogwash, the lot of it. Funny how those idiots never seemed to notice the crows were gone.